Real stories, real people.
I had just finished my shift as a paramedic when the hospital clock showed 2:17 a.m. The night was quiet, and my head was still full of ambulance noises and flashing lights. Driving home felt like finally escaping the weight of the day. I turned off the radio to enjoy the silence. Then my phone rang. It was my brother, Michael. He never called that late. His voice sounded strange, nervous. "Hey, Jake, can you stop by Mum's? She's not feeling well," he said. I hesitated for a second, but turned the car around immediately. My mother lived only 10 minutes away. The streets were empty, except for the occasional stray cat crossing under the orange streetlights. I kept thinking something must have happened to her heart again. She'd been fragile since Dad passed 3 years ago. The drive felt longer than usual. When I arrived, I noticed her living room light was still on. I parked quickly and didn't even lock the car. Inside, Michael was pacing near the window. He looked pale. Without saying a word, he pointed toward Mum, sitting still on the couch, hands folded, staring into the hallway. "Mum?" I called softly, but she didn't move. Her eyes were focused somewhere behind me. The room was colder than usual, even though the heater was on. I asked Michael what was going on, but he only shook his head. Finally, Mum whispered, almost without moving her lips, "He's here." I frowned, thinking she meant a neighbor, or maybe she was confused again. "Who's here?" I asked. She looked at me then, and her eyes filled with tears. "Your father," she said quietly. "He wants you to know he forgives you." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My father had died in a car crash. I was 26 then. The last thing we said to each other was during an argument about my job. He'd told me I was wasting my life chasing adrenaline. I'd slammed the door and left. The next day, he was gone. I'd carried that guilt like an invisible weight ever since. Hearing Mum say those words now felt like being punched in the chest. "Mum," I said slowly, "you don't have to say that for him." She shook her head. "I didn't," she whispered. "He told me himself." Before I could react, the lights flickered. Not a power outage, just a short dimming like the air itself thickened. Michael froze. Mum looked toward the hallway again. The air turned cold enough that I could see my breath. Then I saw a shadow near the doorway. It looked like a man's outline, tall, familiar shoulders, the same uniform my father used to wear when he worked at the plant. My stomach dropped. For a second, I thought it was exhaustion, maybe a trick of the mind. But then the figure took one slow step forward, and everything went silent. I couldn't move. I heard Mum start to sob quietly. Michael took a step back, his hand covering his mouth. The figure's face wasn't completely clear, but I could make out enough. It was Dad. Not how he looked in the hospital, but how he was the day before the accident, alive, solid, calm. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me the same way he used to when he waited for me to apologize. Then, softly, he said, "It's okay, son." The words were simple, but they hit harder than anything I'd ever heard. The moment he spoke, every noise returned, the clock ticking, the fridge humming, the faint traffic outside, and then he was gone. The hallway was empty again, as if nothing had happened. I walked toward the spot where he'd been standing, half expecting to feel something, a drop in temperature, a sign, but there was nothing. Just the faint smell of his old aftershave, the one I hadn't smelled in years. Mum wiped her tears and whispered, "He's waiting, but you must live." I didn't understand what she meant, but her voice was steady, like she truly believed it. We sat in silence for a long time. Michael tried to speak but stopped. Finally, he said he had recorded a voice memo by accident on his phone when the lights flickered. Later that night, we listened. There was static at first, then a faint male voice saying something that sounded like, "It's okay." I wanted to rationalize it, to tell myself it was interference or background noise. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't about proof. It was about the message. Somehow, he'd found a way to reach us just once, to let go of what tied him. I never told anyone outside the family. People don't believe stories like this unless they happen to them. A few weeks later, Mom seemed calmer, as if a burden had been lifted. I felt lighter too, though I couldn't explain why. I started going back to night shifts with a different mindset. Every time I heard the siren echo through the streets, I thought of that night. Maybe forgiveness isn't only for the dead, I thought. Maybe it's for the living who carry what's left behind. 3 years have passed since then. Mom keeps his picture on the same table where we saw him that night. I visit her every Sunday. Sometimes, when I arrive, she says, "He's proud of you." I don't ask how she knows. I just smile. At night, when the city is quiet and the ambulance lights fade in the distance, I still hear his voice somewhere in the back of my mind, saying it again softly, patiently, as if it were meant to last forever. It's okay. And every time I hear it, I keep driving, but lighter than before. It had been almost a year since my mother passed away. She died quietly in her sleep after months of illness. I had already packed away most of her things, except a few boxes in the attic. One Friday night, I fell asleep on the couch after a long day. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why. The house was silent except for the refrigerator. I felt a faint smell of her perfume, lavender, and soap, the same she always wore. It didn't make sense. I hadn't opened that bottle since she died. I sat up, trying to convince myself it was just imagination. Then I heard a faint sound from upstairs. It was soft, like someone moving something lightly, a small box sliding across wood. My attic never made noise. I rarely went up there. I turned on the lamp and listened again. Another sound followed, gentle but clear. I told myself it might be wind or an animal, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. There was a pattern, 3 soft taps, then silence. The same rhythm Mum used when she knocked on my door before entering my room. I grabbed my phone for light and walked up the stairs. Every step creaked louder than usual. The smell of lavender grew stronger. When I reached the attic door, I noticed it was slightly open. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I pushed it slowly. The air inside was cold and dry. Boxes, old books, her old sewing machine, everything was still there. Then I saw one of the boxes on the floor half opened. It was the box where I had kept her personal things, letters, rosary, and the ring she used to wear every day. Something inside me hesitated. I stood there for a minute, unsure if I wanted to look closer. Then I saw the light flicker from my phone, low battery. Just before it went dark, I heard it again, the 3 knocks, but this time coming from right behind me, on the attic wall. I turned quickly. Nothing. The air was heavy, but not frightening, more like someone was trying to get my attention. I whispered, "Mum? I don't know why." There was no voice in reply, just another soft tap, like confirmation. I went downstairs, shaking. I didn't feel scared, only uneasy. I made tea and tried to calm myself. The smell of lavender had followed me. I sat in the kitchen until the sky started turning gray. I almost convinced myself it was a dream when I noticed something on the table, a folded paper. It wasn't there before. I opened it. It was a piece of an old letter from Mum's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, the curve of the letters, the ink slightly faded. It said only one thing: check the stove before you leave. That morning, I had planned to leave for a weekend trip. My friend Sarah was coming to pick me up in an hour. I looked at the note again and laughed nervously. Check the stove before you leave. It sounded exactly like something Mum would say, always worried I'd forget. Still, I walked to the kitchen and checked. The stove knobs were turned off, but the smell of gas hit me. I froze. One of the back burners was leaking, barely audible. My heart started racing. I opened the windows and turned everything off carefully. When Sarah arrived, I was still a bit shaky. I told her quickly what happened, skipping the strange part about the attic. She frowned and said, "That's weird. Good thing you noticed. We left for the trip, but my mind kept returning to the smell, the letter, and the 3 knocks. It wasn't about seeing a ghost or hearing voices. It felt more like a nudge, something subtle but clear. The thought that Mum had somehow kept me from making a mistake stayed with me all weekend. When I came back home Sunday night, the air felt different, cleaner, lighter. I went to the attic again. The box was back in its place. Nothing seemed touched. I checked the letter drawer in my desk, and the missing paper from one of her old notes was gone. It was the same piece I'd found on the table. That realization gave me goosebumps. Whatever happened wasn't a coincidence. Still, I didn't feel fear, only gratitude. Some part of her, or her memory, had tried to keep me safe. Since then, I sometimes smell lavender when I'm anxious or forget something important. It comes suddenly, like a reminder. Once, I smelled it just before leaving the oven on, and another time before forgetting my keys. It's never strong, just faint enough to notice. I don't tell many people about it. They'd probably think it's all in my head. Maybe it is, but I prefer to think it's Mum, still looking after me in her quiet way, just like she always did when she was alive. It's been 3 years now. Every time I light a candle for her, I whisper, "I checked the stove." It's our little joke, or maybe our connection. Some nights, when the house is still, I imagine her sitting near me, just watching to make sure everything's fine. There's no fear in it, only calm. People say love ends when life ends, but they're wrong. Sometimes, it just changes form. And if you pay attention, it still finds a way to reach you, even from the quietest corner of your home. I've been a night shift nurse for over 10 years. People think the hardest part is the emergencies or the lack of sleep, but what stays with you are the stories you can't explain. They don't show up in medical charts. They stay in your head. Hospitals at night have their own kind of silence machines, humming, footsteps echoing down long corridors. That's when things happen you can't rationalize. Not loud, not dramatic, just small moments that make you stop and wonder if maybe not everyone who leaves here is really gone. A few years ago, we admitted an older woman, late 70s, no visitors, no family, listed. She was polite, quiet, and always awake when I made rounds. Every night she'd ask me not to turn the lights off completely. "I don't like the dark," she'd say, almost apologetic. I'd smile and tell her it was fine. She thanked me every time. I didn't think much of it then. You get used to small rituals in this job, but something about her gratitude felt different, like she just needed someone to notice she was still here. By the 4th night, her bed was empty. The sheets were clean, the name tag gone. I checked the chart she'd passed away that afternoon. I stood there longer than I should have, just looking at the space where she'd been. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe sadness. She didn't have anyone. The nurse from the day shift said it was peaceful, that she just went quiet. I wanted to believe that meant she wasn't afraid. That night, walking past her room, I caught myself lowering the hallway light out of habit, I guess. 2 nights later, around 3 a.m., I was updating medication charts. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing at the far end of the hall. I thought it was housekeeping, but no one was scheduled for that wing. The figure was turned slightly, facing her old room. I started walking over, ready to ask if they needed something. But the closer I got, the more certain I became. The posture, the haircut, the way she held her shoulders. It was her. The same woman who didn't like the dark. I stopped halfway down the corridor. She turned her head a little, enough for me to recognize her face. I froze. She didn't look sick, not pale, not fragile, just calm. She pointed gently toward her old room, then said, "Thank you for not leaving me alone." Her voice sounded exactly the same as before, and then she turned and walked toward the corner of the hall. When I followed, she was gone. No noise, no flicker of light, just the same hum of machines and the faint smell of disinfectant. I stood there for a long minute, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to check the cameras, part of me didn't. I went back to the nurse station and just sat. The monitor on the wall still showed her old room number. I stared at it, the little green glow pulsing like a heartbeat that wasn't supposed to be there anymore. Nothing in my training prepares you for that. Some things you don't chart. You just carry them quietly until they stop feeling strange. The next morning, I checked her file. Time of death, 2:03 p.m. Underneath, a handwritten note read, "No family present." That part hit me harder than I expected. Nobody should die completely alone. From that night on, I started leaving the hallway, lights dim instead of off. A small thing, but it made me feel like maybe it mattered. Maybe light is a kind of company for those who have to leave in silence. Sometimes, when I pass that same hallway, I catch a faint floral scent like old perfume mixed with disinfectant. It comes and goes in seconds. I don't chase it. I just stop for a moment, breathe, and move on. People would laugh if I told them, but for me, it isn't a ghost story. It's a reminder that compassion leaves a trace, not one you can see, but one you can still feel if you pay attention. Years have passed since then. I've lost count of how many patients I've seen come and go. But she's the one I still think about when the halls go quiet. Maybe it's because she taught me something no medical course ever could, that sometimes all a person needs is not to be forgotten. I still leave the lights dim, not for fear, but for respect. Every time a new nurse asks why I keep the lights on at night, I give the same answer. Because some people don't like the dark. I don't explain more than that. It's enough for me. In a place where so many take their last breath, a little light feels like a promise that someone will always be here, even if you can't see them.